The families of people being held captive in Gaza say they have solid intelligence that the health of several hostages have deteriorated. Some are now in immediate danger. The group of hostages' families said in a letter to Israel's war cabinet. Pressure has been growing on officials over the 138 people still being held by Hamas and other armed groups. Some of the freed hostages met Israel's leaders on Tuesday in a meeting that witnesses say turned rowdy. Relatives say they are desperate for their loved ones to return.
And you try to assemble a puzzle about his condition, but you don't know what his condition, and you know that Hamas is probably tortured them, and every minute that goes by, he has a great risk for his life.
Yeah, it's hope and fear and sadness. I still have hope that I will see my brother again. And fear, I'm really worried about my brother's life because I know who is holding my brother. We are talking about monsters.
Of course, I have that fear that even though I believe my sister alive, I have that fear that she's not. I'm not have any information or evidence about my sister's condition. I have hope she's alive, but I don't know if she's alive. I don't know if she got hurt. I don't know if the Hamas or terrorists rape my sister right now as we talk. I don't know anything, but that all.
At least 6 Palestinians have been killed as Israeli forces again raided the Al-Farah refugee camp in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military prevented ambulances from reaching injured people. Witnesses in the camp said that Israeli special undercover forces entered the camp in the early hours of this morning. One man confirmed that his relative had been shot dead after opening a door to see what was happening. Now, according to the Palestinian authorities, 263 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces and settlers in the West Bank since the war in Gaza began. That exceeds the entire death toll of Palestinians killed in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict last year.
Well, for more on the war, let's cross live to Tel Aviv and speak with Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic. Good to see you, Karl. How effective is the U.S.'s influence and the pressure that they've been putting on Israel after this, I think it's the 9th week of this war that we're seeing?
That's right. It reached the 2-month milestone only yesterday. We're getting, lots of messages from the U.S. because don't forget it's Israel's most important partner, militarily, economically, and also diplomatically. Only yesterday, the U.S.'s President Biden had a phone call with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As many reports are saying that it was perhaps their 16th phone conversation since the war began. We've also seen some comments from the Deputy National Security Advisor from the White House about the war itself. Biden basically telling Netanyahu that more needs to be done to get aid into Gaza to relieve the humanitarian crisis going into a catastrophe, which it is right now. That's one reason you mentioned the Kerem Shalom crossing, border crossing into Gaza. It's very, very important. That's actually a commercial crossing compared to the Rafah crossing. The Rafah crossing is really typically for vehicles, for cars. It's not geared to handle heavy trucks or heavy freight. The Kerem Shalom crossing in peaceful times was used for commercial cargo. But, talk about aid going into Gaza. It's not so straightforward. Israel insists on inspecting every truck that goes into Gaza. What they want to guard against is any dual item or commodity that could be diverted by Hamas for its war purposes. So, for example, they want to look out for things like fertilizer. Fertilizer could be used to make bombs. They want to look out for things like concrete. Concrete could be used to build or repair tunnels that they use in Gaza, or even salt itself. Salt could be even used to make low-grade ammunition. But with the Kerem Shalom crossing, you increase the capacity to screen for this. As a comparison, right now, only about 75 trucks are going into Gaza from Rafah, 75 trucks a day. That's down from 200 during the humanitarian pause. And before the war, it was more than 500. So you have increased capacity there. So that's one of the concessions that Israel is now making after pressure from the U.S. and ostensibly that phone conversation that Biden had with with Netanyahu. As for the second comment, you have the Deputy National Security Advisor saying that at the end of the day, U.S. has a lot of influence over what Israel does, but it cannot control Israel. And the reason why I said that is that at the end of the day, the U.S. cannot impose a hard deadline on when Israel should stop its military operations. We've heard this talk about, Israel only has a few more weeks to go, or the end of January, before it ends this level of high intensity fighting. Well, the U.S. is now kind of being more equivocal about this, saying that at the end of the day, also, we're not going to argue with the fact that, Israel's main objective is to make sure that Hamas no longer has ability to govern or control from Gaza. In other words, no longer has ability to pose a threat to Israel. So does that mean it's not finished until they can kill the leadership or destroy the infrastructure like the tunnels? Let's say they kill the leadership such as Yahya Sinwar or Mohammed Def, the two leaders of Hamas in hiding in Gaza. Well, if you kill them, does that mean the threat still goes away? Just keep in mind this to put it in perspective. When the U.S. killed Osama bin Laden, that was not the end of Al-Qaeda. When the U.S. killed leaders of Islamic State, that was not the end of Islamic State. In fact, now Islamic State actually has reinvented itself and is now flourishing in the Sahel regions of Africa. So that's the challenge that the U.S. and Israel is now facing. That's why Israel is saying that, it's not about just killing the leadership, it's also making sure this threat does not exist again, a threat that we now see on a daily basis with rockets still being fired into southern Israel. They want to end that threat.
Well said, Karl. Now, can you give us any update on the likelihood of more hostages being released?
It's now being admitted publicly by the U.S. that the likelihood of any hostages being released by the end of this year, which is only weeks away from now, as a primary goal, that has probably gone away for a number of reasons. It's basically ranging from the fact that, this is being handled through Qatar as a mediator between Israel, the U.S., and Egypt. And as before, Doha has a difficult time reaching its counterparts in Gaza, i.e. the military ones led by Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def, to communicate. There are communication disruptions. So there's that for one. Secondly, we're hearing more reports of how the hostages were being treated in captivity, especially the female ones. And there's a lot of tension now in these talks, especially with the U.S. now going so far as to say that even Hamas leaders are using sexual violence as a weapon and as a tool, and spokespersons from the State Department saying they can't dispute these reports, and they assume that they're true, and that's that. And whereas Israel is kind of pushing back, saying, we don't really want to talk about this in this kind of detail because it suggested that, Hamas, as the State Department is suggesting, they don't want to see these women prisoners if they're released. This includes female soldiers to talk about what happened to them during the conduct of this war. So there's that, and then finally the third factor is that no one's really saying where they all are. Hamas claims we don't know where they all are because they can be held by different factions, and that's why a big sticking point, a sore point, is that to this day, the International Red Cross, they've still been denied access into Gaza to verify proof of life of all the hostages. In other words, we still can't say for sure that the remaining 130 plus hostages are even alive.
Well, it's becoming quite apparent to us watching, and actually a UN official has actually said that Gaza is approaching a point of no return. Things are quite dire. What exactly is he referring to?
Well, that was coming from the head of the UN agency called UNRWA. The UNRWA is a special agency that's designed to oversee and provide relief, education, housing, shelter, you name it, for Gaza. It was created back in 1948. At this point, it has 151 facilities throughout Gaza, providing schools, shelter, food, you name it. However, increasingly, those shelters are now become displacement centers. He's talking about displacement. He's talking about hunger. He's talking about medical care. And then also the fact that we are now approaching the onset of winter. In terms of displacement, for example, with its 151 shelters, this UNRWA alone, 1.9 million Gazans out of 2.3 million have been displaced. This is an area a quarter of the size of Abuja. The northern half has actually been moved to the south. So that's really an eighth the size of Abuja. And 1 million of them are in UNRWA shelters designed to hold like maybe 2,000 people, now have 22,000 people, with maybe up to 400 people, or 200 people, sharing one toilet, for example. And in terms of medical care, ambulances can't go and recover injured people because there's no fuel. So there's that. And then, of course, in terms of food, the World Food Program is saying that more than 80% of the people in South Gaza are taking extreme measures to cope with, avoiding starvation. In North Gaza, it's 97%. One quick anecdote that was mentioned in the New York Times or WhatsApp, a mother in Rafah said, we've had to move 7 times. I have to wait 6 hours to wait in line for food. And when I do get food, I'm getting a plastic bottle of water, a can of beans, and a can of tinned meat that's supposed to last my family of 4 for 3 days before I stand in line again for another several hours, if not spend the night sleeping, waiting to get more relief. And that's the kind of bottleneck that they want to really end to avoid Gaza reaching a point of no return.
Well, Karl, you've really painted a vivid picture of the situation on ground, and it's very disheartening, but we'd like to thank you for your time here on Newsday Arise. Special Correspondent Karl Bostic, live from Tel Aviv.